Hey guys, how's it going? It's Danconia and welcome back to the Overwatch League Roundup 2020 May Melee results for NA. So this is the second of the double headers of results videos for this week as we round out the May Melee tournament and overview what has happened in this crazy weekend of games. We looked at the Asia Pacific region, or APAC, yesterday, which was bonkers in itself, seeing a unprecedented reverse sweep in the final from Shanghai Dragons over the Seoul Dynasty. But I really recommend you go and take a look at that if you haven't already. And today we take a look at NA, which is going to be a slight bit longer because NA has more teams. There are 13 in NA and only 7 in APAC. So because Vancouver Titans now exist in NA, and they were in Korea, but now they're back in NA, we had a qualification match to start out this bracket, and it was between the Toronto Defiants and Vancouver Titans, the two lowest seeds coming into this after Boston Uprising got that shock win over the Los Angeles Gladiators to prevent themselves from playing that match. This was extremely close. Now, a lot of people wouldn't have predicted that, but Vancouver Titans, just prior to the start of this May Melee tournament, picked up a European, I believe Danish DPS player called Shockwave. He was actually Raspberry Racers, I believe. I might be wrong. Or Disaster. Either Raspberry Racers or Disaster. And he was incredibly good in this match. I mean, he is by far the best Vancouver Titans player I've seen in this new roster. He was actually really good. And he was one of the main reasons why this was so close. Toronto Defiant, though, they have lost Siofor for a bit, who wanted a bit of a mental reset. They brought in Zik from Third Impact, I believe. And he looked okay, but he's not as good as Shockwave. Not as good as Shockwave. And I'm sure Shockwave must have been playing on ping. So, very good display from the Vancouver Titans, despite this 3-2 loss to the Toronto Defiant. Yeah, I don't think it's Toronto playing all that badly. I don't think Toronto are a brilliant team, don't get me wrong, but I don't think it's Toronto playing all that badly. I think it's just Vancouver Titans stepped up. And if they can continue to improve, and Shockwave can continue to play like he did there, then maybe there is a bit of brightness for the Vancouver Titans, but nothing like we saw last year, obviously. But that meant that the Toronto Defiant would proceed to the knockout stages. Now, in the knockout stages, the teams that were already seeded, so this is Paris Eternal, Atlanta Reign, Los Angeles Gladiators, and Dallas Fuel, would be able to pick who they played, apart from Dallas, who were the last seed. So Paris Eternal picked to go up against Boston Uprising. So this is an interesting one. Paris Eternal almost bit off a bit more than they could chew with this one, getting a 3-2 victory over the Boston Uprising. And it was close. Boston Uprising made this close. Very impressive from the Boston Uprising. And it's leaning into the fact that we are seeing improvements from this Uprising team right now. The addition of Punk has improved this team. And they look more competitive. They look more gelled. They look more like they are on the same page. They won against the Los Angeles Gladiators last week, and this week they have taken the Paris Eternal very close in the knockout stages, and Paris Eternal are a team that could have gone very far. So, very good from the Boston Uprising, and nothing to be ashamed of getting knocked out in that first knockout stage against the Paris Eternal. They were the top seed in this stage, so well done to the Boston Uprising. I want to say it, well done Boston, because it's actually been a good May Melee tournament, even though you didn't win. That's what I'll say. And continue to improve like that, and it's a bright future. But Atlanta Reign would pick the Toronto Defiant, and this is what you would have expected as a result, really. 3-0 for the Atlanta Reign. Toronto Defiant couldn't compete with the quality that the Reign roster has, and so they kind of just get swept. That's the way it works, and in these early stages, that is what we expected, because there is a bit of a gulf between the teams that are competing around the play-ins or just in the playoffs, like the top half of mid-table, if you see what I mean. There's kind of a gulf between them and the teams that are just outside the play-ins, the likes of Outlaws, Justice, Defiant, Uprising. There's a bit of a gulf in class between those teams, and we saw that on the show here. And in the other match, in the next match, we saw that as well with the Los Angeles Gladiators taking the Washington Justice. Now, Washington Justice obviously still have Stitch and Janu, and I think in the long term they will be massive for the Washington Justice. But they do seem to be a team going in a bit of a transition phase right now, moving to an all-Korean roster, moving to all-Korean staff, by the looks of it, and it's not really settled at the moment. So the Los Angeles Gladiators take full advantage of this and get a 3-0 victory, as you would expect a team like the Gladiators to do. Good bounce back after that loss to Boston, because that was not a good look for the Gladiators whatsoever, even though Boston had improved. So Gladiators are a team that will continue to baffle me slightly, very, very inconsistent and not living up to the expectations we thought of them, but a good win over the Justice to get through to the quarterfinals. And in the last one, that meant we saw the Battle of Texas. We saw Dallas Fuel taking on the Houston Outlaws. In fact, actually, we had the Lone Star Challenge showdown thing before this, and Houston Outlaws, I think, won that one in a very close series. But this one would go the way of the Dallas Fuel 3-1. This was 8th seed versus 9th seed, remember. So it should have been fairly close, and it was fairly close, in all fairness to Houston Outlaws. Houston Outlaws still running the hydration main tank. Still no Muma, and they're still just preferring hydration at the moment, which is very interesting. I would like to see, if we're not going to see Muma, I would like to see the Houston Outlaws sign a main tank. Not going to lie. Not saying that hydration is doing badly, but I think hydration might just be better on the DPS, but maybe hydration is just transferring to the main tank role now. But Dallas Fuel, Decay. What do we do with this player? He is ridiculous. This could be one of the best Widowmaker performances of all time, if not the best Widowmaker performances of all time. Decay is just nuts. Absolutely nuts. And for Dallas Fuel to have a player of this caliber, it is a massive platform to build from. And I really think we're looking at the most promising Dallas Fuel lineup we've ever seen. So hopefully, perhaps even with a few more additions, this Dallas Fuel side can really start to hit the ground running. The only problem is they now are in the quarterfinals with the big boys. So in the quarterfinals, the number 1 seed was the San Francisco Shock, so they got the first pick. They picked the Dallas Fuel. It's difficult for the Fuel, isn't it? Like, they gave a good account of themselves. Decay played well, but when you're up against a team with the quality of the San Francisco Shock, it is never ever going to be easy. So it's a 3-1 for the San Francisco Shock, and yeah, Dallas Fuel gave a good account of themselves. And again, if Dallas Fuel can use this as a platform and continue to play like they have been playing this weekend, they will be a team that I think will definitely get play-ins. So there's not too much to be worried about from the Dallas Fuel. It's a shame that you had to go up against someone like the San Francisco Shock. Again, they get to pick you, so it's a bit harsh, but if they got someone like the Los Angeles Valiant, perhaps they would have been able to make a go of it. But the San Francisco Shock has got so much quality that, yeah, it was very difficult for the Dallas Fuel, but not a bad display from the Fuel whatsoever, and well done to the Shock. As ever, their quality sees them through to the semi-finals. Then we saw the Los Angeles Valiant, who actually were the last pick. They would take on the Paris Eternal, because that was all they were left with. So this was 4th seed versus 5th seed. And a lot of people would argue that the Paris Eternal are a better team than the Los Angeles Valiant. The Los Angeles Valiant perhaps had a favourable fixture list in May, which saw them pick up the 4th spot in NA. And the Valiant came out with something to prove. And that they do. They get a 3-2 win over the Paris Eternal. Which, there's a lot of sides to this. This is probably one of the more one of the bigger upsets of the weekend, I would say. I don't think we've seen a massive amount of upsets. That's what I'll say about that. But this is probably one of those upsets. And the Valiant, I think a lot of people have underestimated the Valiant coming into the season. Their hit scan. Their DPS players all around are very good. Their tanks, I had a lot of questions about Dreamer coming into this season, but Dreamer and McGravy are very, very serviceable. And their backline, Lastro, has really impressed me. And their backline is very good as well. So by no means do I think the Valiant are a top 6 team. I think they're punching a bit above their weight here. But I think they're one of those teams that can cause problems for the big teams every now and then. And they've done that for the Paris Eternal here. Paris Eternal come back with a caveat that, when we come back after the break, they will have Sparkle. who is a phenomenal player. Can't wait to see him playing in the league. And then hopefully he'll also be close, or if not have Xe back, who, well, we know how good he was at the start of the season before his neck problems. So there's a caveat for Paris Eternal. There's a lot more to come from them, but it is a disappointing loss from them, and it's a bit of inconsistency, unfortunately. But it's a very good win for the Los Angeles Valiant, and it means they seal a win on the record, which is something that I think is a massive achievement for the Los Angeles Valiant in this May Melee tournament. I think that's massive. But they move on to the semi-finals, and we'll talk about that one in a minute. But the other two quarterfinals to set up the other semi-final would be the Philadelphia Fusion. They were third pick, and they got to pick the Los Angeles Gladiators. They avoided the Eternal. I think they picked the Gladiators mainly because of the Gladiators' display against Boston. So the Philadelphia Fusion, we know how good the Philadelphia Fusion are. They got Carpe, Hisu, EQO. We've seen a lot of different looks from the Philadelphia Fusion this weekend. And they get a 3-1 victory over the Los Angeles Gladiators. I don't think the Los Angeles Gladiators are quite as good this season as we thought they would be. We thought they would be perhaps a top 6 team. I don't think they are that. They're currently 7th, so they came in 7th seed anyway. I think they are going to be a mid-table team, the Gladiators. And if they can find some sort of consistency, then they will get play-ins, but I don't think they'll get playoffs. But if they start regularly dropping matches to the Boston Uprising or teams like that, then I worry a bit for this Gladiators side. But taking a map off the Philadelphia Fusion is good, and we have seen improvements from the Gladiators during this week. So I think it's not too bad, this result for the Gladiators, but at the start of the season you can't help but think we were expecting more from this Gladiators side, considering that the quality it's got. But I think it's a side that tilts very easily as well. So we will see going forward. But the last one was the 2nd seed Florida Mayhem, who would pick the Atlanta Reign to go against, which was a bit of a surprise. I'm not going to lie. I expected them to pick the Los Angeles Gladiators, but they ended up picking the 6th seed team. Now, the excuse apparently was, or we found out afterwards from one of the Florida Mayhem management, that apparently in scrims they had been sweeping the Atlanta Reign. So that kind of explains it, and here they get a 3-1 victory over the Atlanta Reign. Very good display from the Florida Mayhem. And I think the Florida Mayhem came into this tournament with the most to prove out of anyone in the league. Because Florida Mayhem, we know what the Florida Mayhem were like back in the McDonald's days. They were the kicking boys a lot of the time. Especially last year. And now they come into the season with a new look roster. I was fairly high on the Florida Mayhem at the start of the season, I'm not going to lie. But I kind of got dumbed down by it. And then at the start of the season, they were kind of a bit up and down. They lost to London and people like that. And we were like, oh, is this Florida Mayhem side as good as we thought? But during May, since the little break, during May, they really hit the ground running. But there was always this caveat in the back of the mind. They've played Washington, they've played Vancouver, they've played Boston. So they haven't really played anyone with a lot of oomph to them, a lot of caliber. So Atlanta Reign was the first test of that, and they looked pretty convincing over the Atlanta Reign. So all of a sudden you're thinking, this is a nice look from the Florida Mayhem, but they'd have a bigger test to come in the semi-finals. But let's cover the first semi-final first, which was the San Francisco Shock taking the Los Angeles Valiant. Now, I did say that Los Angeles Valiant was a bit of an upset getting a win over the Paris Eternal, and boy oh boy, taking on the Shock is a whole different ballgame. The Shock get a 3-0 here. The Shock are so good. They are just so good, let's be honest. And the Valiant just haven't got the depth or the quality to compete with the Shock side. Not right now. Valiant are a good side in my opinion, but they are not a top tier side. And it showed here. I think Valiant, if they can maintain victories like they got over the Paris Eternal, if they can do that consistently, they might sneak a playoff spot. But it would be very, very close, and they'd have to play very, very well. But I really think this Valiant team is a play-ins team. And at the start of the season, we were talking about them being one of the worst, if not the worst teams in the league. So I think the Valiant are doing very, very well. But the Shock is a whole different ballpark when you're taking on that team. And it's no shame to be losing to them. And remember, it still means Valiant are in the money for this tournament, getting 5k for the 3rd, 4th place, and they also get a win on their record, which is still very valuable. So it's very valuable. Well, of course it's valuable because teams like Dallas, Atlanta, they won't be getting wins on the record, like Gladiators as well. So Valiant, this is actually really massive for them. But the second semi-final was Philadelphia Fusion taking on the Florida Mayhem. Now, I was talking about the Florida Mayhem, this tournament being a litmus test for them, right? This was really interesting. So, Florida Mayhem get a 3-1 victory over the Philadelphia Fusion. This felt like Florida Mayhem coming of age. This really, really did. This was like the child that has grown up in some respects. We have all questioned the Florida Mayhem. Are they truly a really good side, or are they just getting the luck of the draw? I don't think we can say that anymore. They have just gone and beaten the team that we thought was either the best team or one of the best teams in the league. So now we have to start thinking, well, are Florida Mayhem one of the best teams in the league? I think we have to count them up there now. After this tournament, I have to say I think Florida Mayhem are a playoffs team. I don't see why not. And that is great testament, and I think there's only more to come from this Florida Mayhem team. Yaki and BQB are doing really, really well. Yeah, Fate's a bit questionable at times. Gargoyle had a really good weekend. And the supports, Gangnam Jin and Chris. I mean, Chris is not the best support in the league, but he has stepped up this season. Much better than he was last season, so well done to the Florida Mayhem. Great, great look from the Florida Mayhem. And they honestly looked like the better team. So, to get that over the Philadelphia Fusion is massive. Philadelphia Fusion, they will be disappointed with that. We didn't get the Philadelphia Fusion San Francisco Shock final that everyone kind of thought and wanted, I think. But I don't think this means the Fusion are bad. I think this just means the Mayhem are good. That's what I'm going to say from this match. And I can't wait to see more of these sorts of matchups. More of the Mayhem taking on the Fusion taking on the Shock. And hopefully we'll get to see more of that in June and July. But this sets up a grand final for North America between the San Francisco Shock and the Florida Mayhem. And can anyone stop the San Francisco Shock is my question. Well, the Florida Mayhem gave it a darn good go. So they did lose the first map, Florida Mayhem 2-0, and all of a sudden you're thinking, oh, this is going to be a 4-0, this is going to be a sweep. But Florida Mayhem bite straight back on Blizzard World with a full hold and getting the 1-0 victory on Blizzard World, which is a great look for the Florida Mayhem. Not many teams can full hold the San Francisco Shock. Not many teams at all, so that's fantastic from Florida. And they really asked questions of the San Francisco Shock side throughout this series. But Shock then come back on Volskaya, it's a 2-0 on Volskaya, and all of a sudden you see this tennis match happening, like we did between Seoul Dynasty and Guangzhou Charge, where the map pick kind of determines the winner. We go back to Junkertown, which was Florida Mayhem's map pick. This was really close, but it was 5-4 for the Mayhem. So then you're looking at 2-2. Mayhem are really, really, hitting the ground here. Then we go to San Francisco Shock's map pick. It is Lijiang Tower. And they get a 2-1 victory, although Florida Mayhem do dominate the first control center point. But San Francisco Shock do bring it back. But then San Francisco Shock do break the serve of the Florida Mayhem and get a 3-1 win on the Mayhem's pick of Hollywood, sealing out a 4-2 victory for the San Francisco Shock, crowning them as winners of North American May Melee. So they will take home the 3 wins and Florida Mayhem will take home the 2. This is by no means a bad look for the Florida Mayhem. They took the San Francisco Shock close, and to be quite honest, before the start of this tournament this weekend, we would never have said that was a possibility. This has been a tournament where the Florida Mayhem have come of age. It really, really is. So, I think if I was going to pick out a team that's been most impressive, I would say the Florida Mayhem. And people would argue with me it was the Shock they won. Yeah, the Shock have won, but the Shock have looked like the Shock have always looked like for the past season and a half. This is the Shock we saw last year. This is the Shock that can dominate teams. Dominate the old Vancouver. Shock are really good. But from an improvement perspective, I think Florida Mayhem have been the best team this weekend. Just from an improvement perspective. And perhaps Seoul Dynasty, I suppose you could say as well. So, yeah, I think the best way to describe this weekend is Florida Mayhem coming of age and the Shock stepping up and showing us what they showed us last year. So it's going to be very, very interesting to see what happens for the remainder of this season. Obviously, there is going to be a break now until June 13th, 14th, when we see the league start up again. We will go over the standings quickly because we now know who's got those wins. Philadelphia Fusion still in first with 13 wins. Shanghai in second with 14 wins but 2 losses. San Francisco Shock are up to third on 11 wins now. They're creeping up there. New York are in fourth now after perhaps a disappointing display against the Shanghai Dragons. Florida Mayhem now in fifth though on 9 and 4, which gives them advantage over likes the Paris Eternal, which is very, very good. Paris Eternal in sixth, but they are having a massive problem with Guangzhou Charge breathing down their neck in seventh with a 9 and 6 record. Guangzhou Charge are really pushing up that league now. So, yeah, interesting. Atlanta Reign are now in 8th, and I think we might see Atlanta Reign kind of settle around that position. Seoul are up to 9th, getting their 2 wins now. They were on a 4 and 4 record before this weekend started, and now they're on a 6 and 4. And if they can iron out some consistency issues, then I think they will climb. But I don't think they're up there with the likes of Paris, Florida, New York. They are not one of the best teams in the league. I just can't say it, because their consistency is not good. Hangzhou Spark are in 10th, slap bang in the middle of the league. Give them a bit of time. Architect coming in, and I think Hangzhou Spark will improve. Valiant up to 11th, Gladiators in 12th, London Spitfire are now in 13th. Dallas Fuel in 14th, Houston Outlaws in 15th, Toronto Defiant 16th, Chengdu 17th, Vancouver 18th, Washington 19th, and Boston 20th. Not much changing at the bottom of the league because they all got knocked out before the wins came in. But it's shaping up. It's really shaping up now, and we've kind of hit the middle of the season now. Well, some teams have anyway, like Houston Outlaws, Guangzhou Charge, they played 14 matches, Chengdu Hunters as well. That is exactly halfway. So, yeah, get ready for the run-in. It's coming. It's coming. But I'm going to leave it here for now. So, thank you guys so much for watching this video. If you liked it, give a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you in the next video. See you then.